Hello everyone, this is Grunch, and I am back with part 2 of the Gatecrash draft previews. This time we're going to look at the green cards and the Simic cards. And right off the bat we have an interesting one, starting off with the Evolve mechanic, Adaptive Snapjaw. 4 colorless and a green for a 6/2 with Evolve. So this is probably a good time to talk about Evolve. These creatures, I suspect, are actually quite powerful. The key to understanding them is comparing it, I think, to Unleash, where if you could just choose to put a +1/+1 counter on all these guys, they'd be okay, but not exceptional. So Adaptive Snapshot here would be a 7/3 for 5 mana. Sweet, but not crazy. However, if you were starting off with 2 +1/+1 counters, then he's an 8/4, which is actually pretty crazy for 5 mana. So the key to evaluating the Evolve guys is asking yourself, how many times does this guy have to evolve before he's impressive? And how does he fit in my mana curve and help me to evolve my other lower end Evolve guys? Now, not every Evolve creature is going to be stuck in a proper Simic deck, which means that sometimes you're going to have your Evolve guys in your Gruul decks, or your Dimir decks, or your 4-color decks. And in such decks, you're going to be somewhat less focused on evolving each creature per se. You're going to more see this as the vanilla guy at this mana cost that sometimes gets bigger, sometimes doesn't. You're not going to have as many Evolve guys, that's not your focus. Where these guys get really interesting is if you're trying to draft around them, draft an Evolve deck, so to speak. And in that instance, I think Adaptive Snapjaw is pretty powerful. With 6 power, he's quite likely to trigger all of the other Evolve guys you have on the board. And with only 2 toughness, he's got a decent chance of evolving as the game goes on. 5 mana is kind of a sweet spot where you want to make sure that whatever you're playing that turn is both relevant to what's going on the board, but also evolves all of your other guys. So I think Adaptive Snapjaw is going to be pretty sweet in the Simic decks and sort of okay in the Gruul decks. Not amazing, but you will have other guys that have, you know, more toughness than 2, so he stands a good chance of coming out and then evolving off a Ruination Worm, and then evolving off, say, a Swine, and then maybe evolves again, and you can see how this spirals out of control pretty quickly, where your creatures get continuously better as the game goes on. So my verdict then on Adaptive Snapjaw, probably pretty good in your Simic deck, passable but not exciting in your Gruul deck, not a high pick, but a good one, and you can get it later on. The next card is a piece of cheesy cheese. Some nice sweet brie for you, maybe a little cheddar. A little Swiss, provolone, American. Okay. Point is, this is an aura that kind of protects itself because the guy gets hexproof and kind of makes your guy sweet because he's hard to block, but really, overall, you're not getting any power and toughness. You're not getting any card drawing. You're actually losing a card to make one creature just super hard to stop or kill. I just don't see it. I don't think this is a very good card. Moving on, though, we have Bioshift. For a single blue-green hybrid mana, you can, at an instant, move any number of +1/+1 counters from target creature onto another target creature with the same controller. So, while this does have a hybrid mana, it requires +1/+1 counters to be anything but a blank, which means it's almost certainly going in a pure Simic deck. I don't see too many Gruul decks and or Dimir decks wanting this. Perhaps maybe as a sideboard card against an opponent who is playing an Evolve deck, but beyond that I think it's just a Simic combat trick. And as a combat trick, I think this one's pretty useful because moving where the counters are allows you to control how your guys are going to evolve for further plays. So you can set up, say, not to give a spoiler, but there's an unblockable creature coming up in a little while, and you can put a bunch of power on your unblockable guy and just put them on a short clock. Or you can use this to offset a creature that's about to be hit with some toughness-based removal spell. So, kind of a neat combat trick, kind of sort of a way to control your Evolve. Probably pretty good in Simic, but still pretty narrow. Also rather narrow is Burst of Strength. Single green mana for an instant that untaps and puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Now, untapping a creature can be pretty sweet. There can be some abilities that do some stuff when you untap, but overall, not generally worth a card. Same goes for the +1/+1 counter. Now your evolve guys are already going to be getting +1/+1 counters, and while there are a few ways to use those counters for fun and profit, this just seems like not enough as a package in one card. It's possible I'm wrong, but I just don't see it. Moving on, we have the giant spider of the set, although perhaps one of the most interesting giant spiders ever printed in Krakenura. 2 colorless and a green for a 1/3 creature with reach and evolve. Now he only has to evolve once to be an actual proper giant spider, with a mana discount, so that's already pretty sweet. But the potential exists here for him to go bigger. If he evolves twice, he's a Siege Mastodon with reach. Evolves again, he's a 4/6. And as a 4/6, now we're talking about a guy that's kind of beefy. He's pretty big. That's 3 evolve triggers, granted, but I think you can do this. And I think this is the kind of creature you're going to want. Evolving even a single time makes him kind of obnoxious for the Boros decks to attack into. Second evolve trigger makes him actually obnoxious even for Gruul to attack into. Yeah, I like this guy. Along the theme of mangs that I wouldn't mind slapping down, we got Crowned Ceratok. 3 colorless and a green for a 4/3 creature with trample. And it also says that each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. Which means that, assuming he evolves all the other evolve guys on the board, he's giving trample to all of your evolving guys. And future evolved guys. And evolve. Anyway, this guy is Order of the Sacred Bell with upside, and it's a pretty good upside, so it seems like one of the better 4-drops you can get. A creature that impresses me somewhat less, though, is Disciple of the Old Ways. 1 colorless and a green for a 2/2. It allows you to spend 1 red, and it gains first strike until end of turn. Well, okay, it's a bear, and sometimes you want bears. Doesn't evolve, so it doesn't continue to attack relevantly into the game. It's not exactly crushing anybody on turn 2, and the set has a fair number of 2/3s for 3, which means that despite the chance of having first strike, this guy probably gets brick-walled relatively quickly. You're going to want 2-drops, and that's just the way the game is played, but I wouldn't grab this guy too super high. On the other hand, Drakewing Crossus is actually a pretty good guy. 3/1 flying and trample for a colorless, a green, and a blue. Now, trample on a 3-power creature isn't terribly super relevant, although it means that if you're, say, splashing a color or just using some green blood rush on him when he's beating through some other flyer, it gets maximum value, but that's kind of situational. Mostly this is a 3-power flyer for 3 mana, which means it's going to clock your opponent, and hopefully trigger your evolve guys that you have out on the board when he comes down in the first few turns. So this is probably the kind of card you want in your Simic deck. And moving on with the theme of things you're going to want in your Simic deck, we have Elusive Crossus. 1 colorless, 1 green, and 1 blue for a 0/4 unblockable creature with evolve. Now the unblockable with the 0 power probably sounds kind of weird. You're like, what's going on there? But obviously, this guy's meant to go in a dedicated evolve deck. Having 0 power, he's all but guaranteed to evolve off every play you make after him, and having 4 toughness, he's likely to evolve every other guy you already have on the board with evolve. Being unblockable means that you can sit back with the rest of your guys on defense while the elusive one puts your opponent under pressure and forces them to kill you. Now, that's not quite as good as it might be otherwise, because if you're evolving all your guys, pretty soon your guys are just so much bigger than theirs that you're just going to crush them at some point anyway. But Elusive Crossus sort of forces the issue a little more quickly. Overall, I think this is a really, really solid 3-drop for the evolve dedicated decks, but you're going to want to be in an evolve dedicated deck to be making use of him. So, if you're on this deck, this is the guy you want. Another guy I think you're likely to want is Experiment 1. 1 green mana for a 1/1 creature with evolve, and the ability to remove 2 +1/+1 counters from him to regenerate. So let's get this straight right off the bat. If you play this guy on turn 1 and play about anything on turn 2, honestly, you've made yourself an Isamaru. That's already great. It's not too hard, really, to play this guy, evolve him, and then evolve him again on turn 3. So, just with the creatures I've already talked about in this video, turn 1, Experiment 1, turn 2, Disciple of the Old Ways, turn 3, Croconura, and get in for 5. It's pretty solid aggressive curve, and Experiment 1 already has 1 regeneration set up. Speaking of which, the regeneration probably looks odd. It's kind of like, why do I want to regenerate my guy, but it gets smaller? But it's just pure upside on a creature that was already efficient. It means that sometimes when your opponent would have traded, you can choose not to trade. Or, better yet, if it were, say, against some creature that was heavily power stacked, like the adaptive dinosaur guy from earlier, then you can remove the counters and maybe still kill their guy, in which case you've traded 2 counters for a guy, and that's pretty sweet. So, I like this guy quite a bit, and I think he's the beginning of a bright mana curve for a happy Evolve deck. Now, I'm generally not a fan of auras. They come with the risk of getting 2 for 1 easily. They're kind of flimsy, and this aura in particular that we're talking about is Forced Adaptation. 1 green mana for an aura. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on enchanted creature. Now, this doesn't do anything to the board right away, and it offers the risk of getting 2 for 1. But it fits right in with the theme that this Evolve deck is trying to build, which is, I have some guys. Those guys are going to get bigger. And if you don't kill me right away, or force me to do something, at some point, I'm just going to have guys that are way too big for you to hope to stop. That's not to say Forced Adaptation is what we'd strictly call a good card, per se. Now, there are some ways to use the counters in this set for tricky shenanigans, and if you don't have those shenanigans going, this probably isn't worth playing. But it might be sometimes. Depends on what all is in your deck. So, while you definitely don't want to start the draft by picking these, if you're already in Simic and you get certain cards to go with this, I could see this working out. A card I see working out less often, though, is Greenside Watcher. 1 colorless, 1 green for a 2/1 that can tap to untap target gate, which means it's untapping the guild gates, which means, well, sometimes it'll tap for mana. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes it's a Goblin Piker. And let's be clear, I don't think the Evolve decks are in the business of getting Goblin Pikers. Gruul decks may want a Goblin Piker, and Gruul decks would definitely like to slam their beefy fatties a little bit quicker. So, this creature, like so many others, is going to be dependent on what else you have. If you have 2, 3, 4 gates in your deck, then sometimes the upside's worth it. But if you don't want the Goblin Piker aspect in the first place, then you're going to need the mana to be much more reliable, which is much more difficult, which is why I don't think this is a terribly impressive creature. Next up, we have Hindervines, which for 2 colorless and a green instant is a fog that doesn't prevent the damage dealt by creatures with +1/+1 counters on them. So, if you're evolving, this is a one-sided fog, which is okay. It's a combat trick. But if you didn't tap your mana to play a guy, you didn't evolve on the turn, which means you gotta have something going on, or you're just out of gas. Your opponent's probably going to figure it out relatively quickly. This may not mean he can play around it, but it means that you're not going to be ambushing anyone with this. So, I think this card is pretty situational, could result in some blowouts, but overall, it's just going to be a little too unreliable. Speaking of unreliable, up next is Hydroform. It's an instant for 1 blue, 1 green, and it says target land becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with flying until end of turn, and it's still a land. So I'm trying to figure out what we do with this. It's probably not worth it as just a 3-mana lava spike. That's not impressive. We can trade a land for their flyer. That's a thing that could be done. It's not happy because we're technically getting 2 for 1, even though as the game goes on, lands end up being pretty marginal and you end up with extras of them for the most part. Though you definitely don't want to do this early. And if you're short on lands already, this is a very desperate move. You can ambush guys at this, but you're not going to want to do it right away. So what's going on here? I think it's going in your sideboard. Next is Ivy Lane Denizen. 3 colorless and a green for a 2/3 creature that says, whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So it kind of sort of pre-evolves the guys that come after him. Sort of. It's weird. I'm kind of torn between saying he's just completely terrible versus just saying, like, well, he's just really situational. But overall, 2/3 for 4 mana needs to do quite a bit more than maybe increasing the size of future creatures slightly. So this is pretty weak. Pretty weak. Also how I would describe Merfolk of the Depths. 4 colorless and 2 blue and green hybrid mana for a 4/2 creature with flash. The only real upside, the only real particular reason you would want this guy is so that you can leave your mana open to threaten to do something else with it. And then when your opponent doesn't do anything, you play your flash guy. It's pretty expensive for a 4/2, and flash is fine in this set, but not that amazing. Granted, this is going to be played mostly in decks that already have some evolve guys, so it's kind of a pseudo combat trick, which is probably why they costed it at 6, but at the end of the day, it's still kind of a lot of mana for the creature that you get. Not impressed. Also, sadly not impressive is the Miming Slime. 2 colorless and a green for a sorcery that puts an X green ooze creature token onto the battlefield, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So as a 3-drop, this guy's probably going to be about a gray ogre in value. And later on in the game, he's only as big as whatever else you have going on, which is sort of win more if you already have a fatty. And I guess the optimal situation would be if you have some very power-heavy creature like a Scorchwalker, and then you play this and get a 5/5 for slightly less mana than you might otherwise. But overall, this is just kind of awkward. Ah, the Naturalize. At this point, if you don't know what Naturalize does, you have more learning to do than watching my videos. I will say that in Return to Ravnica, there were several very obnoxious creature auras. And there are a couple in this set, but they don't really seem on the level of Knightly Valor. So, probably just a sideboard option. Much more interesting, however, is Nimbus Swimmer. It is X, a green, and a blue for a 0/0 flyer. And it says, Nimbus Swimmer enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counter. So you're getting an X creature that starts at a 1/1 for 3 and then scales up. So at what point does this guy become efficient? Well, at 5, you're getting a 3/3 flyer for 5 mana, which is kind of about the baseline for what you'd pay for that. It's still a little overcosted at 4 for a 2/2, although when that's what you have to have, and that's what you need, you'll need it. The big upside comes when the game goes later. And the longer the game goes, the later you get to play this guy, the more amazing he is. But let me just make clear. At 6 mana, he's a 4/4, which is Air Elemental. And that's pretty beefy. That's about as big as flyers come, barring some rares. And at 7, he's a 5/5, which is pretty much into rare territory. So I think this guy is going to be one of the draws for choosing to go into Simic in the first place. I think he's going to be one of the ways that you're rewarded for the game going on past the first few turns. Along the lines of the game going past the first couple turns, we have Predator's Rapport. 2 colorless and a green for an instant that says, choose target creature you control. You gain life equal to that creature's power, plus its toughness. So if you have, let's say, a 4/4, then this is 3 mana for 8 points of life, which is actually enough that it could matter. So I don't think you're going to be main decking this card, but as a sideboard option against the more aggressive opponents, this is pretty good. Pretty darn good. Next up, we have the Rust Scarab. 4 colorless, 1 green, For a 4/5 creature, it says, whenever it becomes blocked, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. So, it's not going to reliably take out artifacts and enchantments. This is no Indrik Stomp Howler for those who remember the original Ravnica. But it is still going to threaten to do that, and sometimes their opponent's going to have to block. If they don't have 5 life, they have to block. So, while the disenchant effect isn't going to be the most reliable, you get a decent sized creature along with it. Neither half of this is particularly impressive, so you don't really want to play a lot of this guy, but sometimes his upside will trigger, sometimes you gotta play a marginal guy, but overall, you don't want to pick this one big. A somewhat better creature in Scab Clan Charger now. 3 colorless and a green for a 2/4, with Blood Rush of a green and a colorless, and the creature you Blood Rush gets +2/+4. So, 2/4s that don't have, say, Reach or some other ability are kind of vary in value directing with the size of the other creatures that are running around the format. But Scab Clan Charger gets to benefit from being around Evolve guys. In particular, that 4 toughness has a decent chance of triggering much of Evolve mechanics. And the Blood Rush effect is just gravy. So, while normally Pillarfield Ox isn't quite where you want to be, I think this is a pretty good Pillarfield Ox. Not a high pick, don't get me wrong, but it'll go in there. You'll play it. Something, though, you won't be playing is Serene Remembrance. 1 green for a sorcery. Shuffle Serene Remembrance and up to 3 target cards from a single graveyard into their owner's libraries. This is a pretty narrow effect, and really the only place I can see this being useful is if you are playing against the Dimir Milieu Out opponent, and you somehow forgot that you could sideboard up past 40 cards in Limited, and just really needed to get them with this. But really just jam the rest of your playables that were in your sideboard, a few extra lands beyond what you thought, sit down with your 55, 56 card deck and laugh a little at the fact that your supposed life total just went from 40 to 56. Moving along, we have the Shamble Shark. A green and a blue for a 2/1 creature with Flash and Evolve. So this is pretty solid. It's a Goblin Piker with a Flash with it, which Flash is pretty sweet when it doesn't cost a whole lot and you're not paying a whole lot here. Then Evolve on the 2-drop is also pretty good. So this guy's just a pretty good guy. If you're Simic, you probably want this guy. But more importantly, is anybody else disturbed by the fact that this Shark Crab Man appears to be completely pregnant? I can't tell if it's female because it's a Shark Crab Man, but apparently the Shark Crab Man get busy. Shark Crab Man, brown chicken, brown cow. Getting busy is also what I would like to describe as using the Simic charm. 1 green, 1 blue, and instant. And the 3 modes are Giant Growth, Unsummon, and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. All 3 of these are completely fine, perfectly useful limited cards. Mizium Skin saw plenty of play. If you haven't played Return to Ravnica, you may not appreciate Mizium Skin. It was one of the most underrated cards in the set. Actually, just a very good card. Giant Growth is great, Unsummon is great, and having the option to do any of these things means that every single game that you draw Simic Charm, you're likely to be happy, which means it's a good card. Next up, we have the Simic Key Rune. It's templated just like the other Key Runes, but when animated becomes a 2/3 green and blue crab that has hexproof. So, there's definitely some top end to your Simic card suite. There's definitely some bigger guys who might not mind ramping out, but overall, I think the Simic Key Rune is going to be one of the worst ones for 2 reasons. First of all, if you play this, it doesn't trigger your Evolve guys, and that's, I think, really going to be one of the keys, is to get Evolve guys down and get them bigger, and just advance your board presence every turn. And the second thing is that a 2-3 with hexproof is not terribly impressive. It's fine, you'll do it sometimes, but it's just not the best. Something that might be one of the best, and is one of my pick for the best commons in the set, is Slaughterhorn. 2 colorless and a green. For a 3-2 creature, with Blood Rush for 1 green, target attacking creature gets +3/+2. So +3/+2 is not quite a giant growth, but that's still pretty solid. +2/+2 is often fine, and that comes on various versions of giant growth, variations on that theme. Savage Surge comes to mind. So this creature is, on one side, a Warpath Ghoul, which is already a perfectly acceptable option, and on the other side is basically a giant growth, a combat trick, something along those lines. And with those two options combined, I think this card's very good. I think this is one of your better green commons. I think it can go in both your Gruul decks and your Simic decks. Yeah. Next up, a little nod to those Aura fans out there. We have the Spire Tracer. 1 green for a 1/1. Spire Tracer cannot be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. Harkens back to Silhana Ledgewalker of the previous Ravnica, but without hexproof, it's not quite the incredibly obnoxious target for Aura. Its previous cousin from the previous set kind of was. It's just not as obnoxious a card. And really, it's kind of just barely a card. Don't play it. Something we've probably all wasted many hours of our life playing, though, is tower defense. Generally speaking, I like to build one of the most basic kind of towers, or the two most basic kind of towers, and just build a lot of those all the way around the path the enemies follow. But if the game is one of those variations where you get to upgrade your towers, then I recommend doing that. Usually you want to still build 2 or 3 and then upgrade them as you go along. It depends how many times you can upgrade them. Some versions of the game allow you to upgrade something endlessly, and in some of those versions, the best thing you can do is make 1 tower and just upgrade it continuously. Make it so that it's splooging tower uberness all over the enemy stream that's trying to get past it. But overall, it's kind of a fun diversion. As to the Magic the Gathering card, just stick it in your sideboard. Somewhat less likely to be in your sideboard, though, is Urban Evolution. 3 colorless, 1 green, 1 blue for a sorcery. Draw 3 cards. You may play an additional land this turn. In Limited, this is a Concentrate / Harmonize, or for those heathen Pokemon youngsters out there, a Jace's Ingenuity, you filthy newbies. This is one of those effects that is generally worth playing. You pretty much always play this effect when you have access to it. It's solid, and the extra land here isn't that amazing. It's just kind of a little upside for the fact that you're spending 2 colors of mana, but anytime you get card advantage in Limited, you take it. This card's much more interesting and constructed, where the implications for it are potentially far-reaching. We might see actual proper ramp decks in Standard once this card is out. Pretty sweet to play this guy. Play a land, Fog on their turn. Next turn, Sphinx's Revelation, Fog again. Just laugh. Ha! You're playing creatures and attacking? You fool. Somewhat interesting is the Verdant Haven. 2 colorless and 1 green for an enchant land that you gain 2 life when it enters the battlefield. And it says that whenever the enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of any color to his or her mana pool. So this is mana fixing, mana ramp, and life gain all at once. So the life gain goes a long way toward offsetting the tempo loss from playing this. The mana fixing is useful, and overall, this is just a pretty sweet card. If for some reason you have a particularly top-heavy Gruul or Simic deck, or you're playing more than 3 colors, or even just 3 colors, you may want this. May even make it inconstructed. I mean, we'll see. It isn't that much worse, really, than a Chromatic Lantern, and 2 life is pretty sweet. Pretty sweet. Also, an accurate description of the Wasteland Viper. 1 green for a 1/2 creature with Death Touch. And for 1 green, you can Blood Rush this onto a guy who then gets +1/+2 and Death Touch. Ambushing Death Touch on something is pretty sweet, especially if your opponent, say, tries to combine several smaller creatures into blocks to kill your bigger Gruul guy. You're going to make sure you get all of them, and at +1/+2, there's a decent chance your guy then survives combat. And as a 1-drop, this guy bricks almost all of the early aggressive creatures and then continues to threaten any ground pounder that comes in later on in the game. So, I think this is a pretty solid card. Not outstanding, but solid. The penultimate card in this video is Wildwood Rebirth. 1 colorless and 1 green. An instant. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, this may not sound particularly awesome. Regrowth is sort of generally directly as valuable as what you're getting back, which is why some players sort of memorialize it with their Time Walks and Ancestral Recalls and Time Twisters and Black Lotuses. And yes, in that context, it's pretty ridiculous. But if all you're getting back is a Rampant Growth, then it's just a 4-mana Rampant Growth. In this set, however, you have Blood Rush effects, which means you can discard some of your sweeter creatures and then get them back. So, while this is kind of narrow and not terribly impressive, it's not the worst either. And last, but far from least, is the Simic Guildmage. 1 green, 1 blue, 2/2 creature. Spend a green and a blue. Each creature you control enters the battlefield this turn with an additional +1/+1 counter. Now, I had to read that a couple times before I realized that even if your guy doesn't have any +1/+1 counters on it, it does still get 1 +1/+1 counter, which means that come later on in the game, when you have extra mana to spend, your guys are just going to come in naturally bigger. The second ability, however, is the really strong one. 1 green, 1 blue, remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control, draw a card. Now, if you're playing blue and green and you can't find some +1/+1 counters on your creatures, you're in a deep, deep hole to begin with. Drawing cards is fantastic. Drawing them for 2 mana with a slight loss of board presence is also very good. This is going to allow you to basically continuously draw cards. It's basically an engine unto itself. And both as a supplement to your Evolve guys and as almost a strategy on his own. I think Simic Guildmage is one of the very best creatures in the set. Probably the best Guildmage in this set, although it's close. And one of the best reasons to go Simic. And that concludes the Green and Simic draft preview. Thanks for watching.